Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto went through puberty again. Our heroes did not come from a future where everything has gone horribly wrong. They did not travel back in time to save the world from a bleak or miserable fate. As a matter of fact, all they want to do is find a way back home as soon as possible. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 28, Effing Dreamers. Shikamaru Nara was not in a good mood. As the Hokage's advisor and right-hand man, he had some pretty big responsibilities. While his child self may have balked at the workload he dealt with every day, Shikamaru accepted that there was no one more qualified for this job than he. So as much as he would have loved to lie back in the grass and watch the clouds go by, he still came to work every morning. Except for holidays, of course. And Sundays. And family emergencies. And sick leave. And seminars. And personal days. And when he was on vacation. But aside from that, he came into work every morning and did his job as diligently as any member of the Hokage's staff. He was not a workaholic by any stretch of the imagination, but he was enough of an adult to get off his ass and do his damn job. Except for when he just didn't feel like it. But this was much rarer than one might expect of him, if one were to judge the probability by the character and disposition of Shikamaru as he was when he had been a kid. Part of the blame for this disparity could be placed on simple maturity, while the rest lay squarely on the shoulders of his beautiful, wonderful, infuriatingly stubborn wife. To marry Nara could give the wife of Macbeth a run for her money as far as what she could nag and guilt and harangue her husband into doing, and rarely did she lose an argument. Shikamaru may have been technically more intelligent, but to marry was deviously persistent, and also still perilously hot, middle age be damned. No matter how well-reasoned a debate he might make, if Tamari wasn't convinced, then he wouldn't win. All she had to do was threaten to start sleeping in the guest bedroom and Shikamaru would immediately fold. Thus, despite his natural inclinations, Shikamaru was genuinely a pretty diligent worker. He had to be, as the Hokage's advisor. If there was only one thing to be said in favor of Naruto Uzumaki's skill as a leader, then Shikamaru would claim it to be that Naruto was aware of his own shortcomings, as far as more intellectual matters went. While the guy had come a long way from being the dead last dunce everyone had laughed at back in the academy, the world was still full of people much cleverer than him, and he knew it. So Shikamaru was entrusted with advising the Lord Seventh in a wide range of matters, helping him hammer out all kinds of complicated policy decisions. Naruto saw the big picture, but Shikamaru looked at the little details. Naruto was the idea guy, but Shikamaru was the one who figured out if and how to make it work. And Shikamaru was fine with that. Even if he couldn't live the average, unremarkable life he'd always wanted, that didn't mean he had to put himself up on the front stage. He was content to be the right-hand man. As a matter of fact, he preferred it. Shikamaru Nara was, in short, the very antithesis of the stereotypically ambitious and treacherous advisor. But that didn't mean he would be averse to wringing the Hokage's neck if that bastard didn't walk in the door within the next 5 minutes. He still isn't here, huh? Mogi looked around the office, carrying another short stack of forms. Where should I put these? Just set them down on the floor, Shikamaru said with a grimace. Try to leave a clear path, though, will you? He was exaggerating, of course. It wasn't as though the office was in any danger of becoming packed from floor to ceiling with paperwork, there being simply a modest pile on Naruto's desk, but there was still a lot of stuff that needed the Hokage's personal scrutiny or approval. While Konoha's bureaucracy was far from so inefficient as to need the Hokage's signature on everything, there were still mission requests, progress reports, miscellaneous proposals, and other such stuff that required Naruto's attention. Mogi smiled sheepishly and set the forms on the desk. There hasn't been any word, then? She asked. I'd think someone would have raised a fuss by now if he was sick. And he didn't say he'd be coming in late, either, unless I'm much mistaken. Right. He didn't, yeah, Shikamaru sighed. Which is why I'm starting to seriously consider an assassination attempt if he doesn't get here soon. I think you'll have to get in line behind a few people for that. Mogi chuckled. Probably. Shikamaru shrugged and glanced at the papers. I've sent Udon over to check up on the guy, and hopefully Hinata doesn't mistake that for an attempt on her husband's life. We've lost too many good Umbu that way. He has a very non-threatening presence, Udon does. I'm sure even Hinata-san wouldn't perceive him as an assassin, Mogi said, smiling and waving a hand dismissively. One of them probably just came down with a cold and lost track of time. It's happened before. Shikamaru hummed and stroked his goatee. Possibly. Somehow I doubt it, though. Do you want me to fetch Sakura-san or Shizune-san? Mogi asked. Because with all due respect, Shikamaru-sama, even if your intuition tells you otherwise, I still think it would only be prudent to have a medic at the ready. Go ahead, Shikamaru said. You're probably right about that much, at least. When it comes to that guy, it's always wisest to prepare for every possibility. Get Sakura, and Sasuke too while you're at it. Between those two, no matter what's keeping the 7th from coming into work, they should be able to handle it. Whether it's a cold, an assassination attempt, or a fit of pique brought on by an impending midlife crisis. He gestured vaguely, concluding his statement. Mogi nodded and curtly bowed. Of course, Shikamaru-sama. And for the last time, he added in exasperation, just San is fine. But Mogi had already vanished in a swirl of leaves before he could finish his sentence. Shikamaru sighed, looking at the foliage now strewn about on the floor. An eye twitched. I'm not cleaning this up, he muttered. Pain in the ass. Naruto stirred slowly. He felt something soft and a bit heavy lying on top of him. His back ached a little, too, and his feet were a tad chilly. He was on the floor, he realized. How did he get there? Did he roll out of his bed in the middle of the night? Blinking gradually awake, Naruto pondered. Where was he? This didn't look like his bedroom. Not even close. There was zero resemblance between this place and his apartment, wherever this place was. Naruto was at a loss. Soft. He murmured, feeling something squish against his chest. What is this? Then he paused, noticing something odd about his voice. He said. What's up with this? I sound, my voice is all deep. Uncharacteristically deep and low-pitched. He could still recognize it as his voice, but it sounded a fair bit deeper than he could ever remember it sounding before. He hummed thoughtfully. Do I have a cold? He wondered. Curious, Naruto tried swallowing. Smooth, easy, and not at all sore or scratchy. Then he sniffed. Clear, unobstructed, and nearly silent. Odd. It didn't feel like a cold, at least not in that regard. His joints did feel a bit stiff, though, and his back was feeling kinda sore, but the last one may have just been from waking up on the floor. He didn't really feel any sort of headache or general ickiness, either. So it's not a cold, then, he mused to himself. A beat. Naruto was struck by a sudden recollection. Oh, shit. The test. I almost forgot. Whipping his head around, he sought out the nearest clock he could find. He saw an odd-looking one on the bedside table, one that read 9:15. Crap. Naruto swore. I am so late. In a panic, he pushed the pretty, half-naked woman off of him and darted for the closet. Despite being sure that he had never seen this room before in his life, Naruto was able to find a change of clothes like he had done this 1,000 times before. He was a bit upset that he couldn't find any of his clothes, but he nonetheless grabbed what he could and got dressed. In too much of a hurry to worry about washing up, and hoping Sakura-chan wouldn't notice if he looked a little messy than usual, Naruto rushed out of the room. Again, despite never having been here before, Naruto was able to navigate the house with ease. He didn't notice it, being otherwise preoccupied, and a bit dense to boot, but on some level he seemed to know this place like the back of his hand. Naruto was halfway down the stairs before he realized something. Wait, who was that pretty lady lying on top of me? This thought gave him serious pause, such that he wound up tripping and stumbling. His brain froze up, stunned senseless as the blonde belatedly registered the fact that he'd woken up underneath a buxom, half-naked beauty. He fell down the stairs and crashed into the landing. It hurt less than he expected. His body rolled as soon as it hit the floor, and he was back on his feet before he even knew what was going on. Whoa, lucky, Naruto muttered, looking down at his body. I'm okay, eh? He blinked. Why was his right arm wrapped up in so many bandages? He didn't remember hurting it. Now that he thought about it, though, it was like that when he woke up, wasn't it? Curiouser and curiouser. Naruto thought about this for a whole 3 seconds before remembering why he'd been in such a hurry. Oh, right. He yelped. Crayop, I am so late. Gotta hurry. He ran for the door. Man, what's up with those two today? Boruto muttered to himself as he strode up the steps to the front door. I can see one of them sleeping in, but both? They must be getting old, those parents of ours. With hands in his pockets, lips pursed and brow furrowed, Bolt was lost in thought. He absent-mindedly nibbled on the last vestiges of the toast Himawari had made him and walked up to the door. I should check up on them if they're still asleep, he said to no one in particular. It'd be a nuisance if that old man died overnight and started stinking up the house. Although he'll probably live to 100, with as stubborn as he is. Sighing, Bolt reached out to grab the doorknob. He swallowed the last piece of crust and smacked his lips. Wonder if we still have any orange juice. He mused. I'm thirsty. Bolt turned the handle. In a turn of events that probably could have been seen coming from a mile off, the door flew open and smacked him in the face. Bolt staggered for a moment, and that was long enough for his old man to run straight into him. They fell to the ground in a tangle of limbs and cursing. Damn it. Crap. Naruto swore as they toppled. Watch where you're going, you jerk. Gah. Shitty old man. Bolt snarled in turn. Why don't you watch where you're going? He thrashed in frustration as the older blonde fell down on top of him, angrily flailing his arms and catching his dad upside the head with an erratic fist. Ow. That hurt, you bastard. Naruto cursed. And who are you calling a shitty old man? I call like I see, you shitty old man. Bolt snapped. What were you doing sleeping in this long, huh? You're way late, damn it. Shikamaru's gonna be seriously pissed at you. How's that any of your business, asshole? Naruto obstinately retorted. And Shikamaru? What's that lazy idiot got to do with anything? Snap. You're the last person who should be calling someone an idiot, Dad. Bolt crashed another fist down on top of his father's head. The older blonde swore vehemently, if not terribly creatively, and he rolled off of his son, clutching at his head. Ow, ow, ow. Naruto said, wincing, and rubbing his poor noggin. That really hurts, damn it. He paused, then, trailing off for a moment. Blink. Blink. Wait, what? He stared at Bolt for a second. Hey, did you just call me? Come on, old man, Bolt said, scoffing, and holding a hand out. Since you're running so late, I'll give you a lift. Just this once. For a moment, his dad just sat there and stared at him like a complete stranger. Bolt scowled in irritation and thrust his hand out again, this time with greater emphasis. He glowered at his old man in annoyance, feeling irked by the idiotic expression on his dad's face. Come on. You're really late, aren't you? Bolt said, frustratedly running a hand through his hair. Damn it, and this was supposed to be my day off, you know. But his dad continued to stare at him with that stupid look on his face. It was really starting to piss him off. After a seemingly interminable wait, the man finally stopped gaping dumbly and actually spoke. Dad? You know. Naruto said slowly, confusedly shaking his head. Hey, who the hell are you? Now it was Bolt's turn to stare with a stupid look on his face. He felt like a duck in a thunderstorm. Hey, that's not a funny joke, you old coot, he said, irritably scratching his cheek. Don't pretend to have amnesia on me, now. That routine stopped being funny after the third time. Amnesia? Said Naruto, looking completely clueless. Right, I know what you mean. He nodded superciliously. Amnesia isn't funny. I'm sure I don't have anything like amnesia. Who even wants amnesia in the first place? He laughed, but it sounded oddly nervous. Bold twitched. Dad, seriously. Naruto leaned in close, looking sheepish, and whispered in a conspiratorial manner. So, what is amnesia, anyways? He asked, making a face. It sounds painful. Boruto Uzumaki knew that his father wasn't an idiot. Not really. However silly the man may have acted at times, he nonetheless had a reasonably good head on his shoulders. Even if Naruto had something of a fondness for stupid jokes like this, he wasn't really an idiot. Very funny, Dad, he deadpanned. You're a regular comedian. A beat. Naruto blinked. Right. Ha ha ha. He laughed and scratched the back of his neck. Noticeably, he looked a touch uncomfortable, with shifty eyes and nervous fidgeting. So, why do you keep calling me that? Bold turned his head to stare at Naruto. His glance turned baleful. Hey, come on. I already told you that joke wasn't funny, old man. What joke? Naruto asked, frowning. Now that I think about it, doesn't it seem more like you're the one pulling a joke on me? Bold's eye twitched dangerously. Hey, seriously, he muttered in a low voice. Cut it out, Pops. Now's not the time for this lame comedy routine. Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and glared. There was something intractably petulant about the expression, a certain childish temperamentality. A look like this wasn't too out of place on his father's face, when the man was fooling around, but this really wasn't the time for the Nanadime to goof off with his son. Bold thought so, and clearly so did Udon. Hokage-sama. There you are. Came the cry of Kano Amaru-sensei's old teammate, a boring but dependable man who did his work in an efficient and unflashy manner, Udon. No last name given. Bold let out a sigh of relief, seeing the man running toward them. Finally, someone who can talk some sense into this geezer, he thought, looking askance at his dad. He made a face and shook his head, getting up. He's all yours, Specs. Good luck, Bold muttered, before going inside. Udon stared at the young man's back for a moment, befuddled, before rounding on the Nanadime. Hokage-sama. He said again, unmistakably addressing Naruto. Come on. You're late. He grabbed Naruto by the wrist and pulled him up onto his feet. Naruto stared dumbly for several long seconds, rooted in place. Even when the door shut behind him and Bold vanished from sight, he could only stare at Udon in silent shock. What? He said slowly, blinking owlishly. Wait, what did you call me? For a moment, Udon was bemused. He cocked his head curiously and squinted at Naruto through his glasses. Are you okay, Hokage-sama? He asked. Naruto's eyes widened. Ho. Hokage, he murmured. You called me Hokage. Yes, Hokage-sama, said Udon, frowning concernedly. I did. You are, after all, the Lord Seventh. In an instant, Naruto's face lit up like a Christmas tree. His lips split in a grin so wide it could have spanned the valley of the end, and gleaming eyes kindled with a light that sent a curiously fearful shiver up Udon's spine. I'm the Hokage, Naruto said slowly, grinning uncontrollably. I'm the Hokage. Ah, yes, you are. Said Udon anxiously. Did you hit your head or something, Nanadime-sama? I'm perfectly fine, Specs. I'm the Hokage, after all. Ha 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 ha. Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and guffawed, loud and uproarious. I'm the Hokage. This is actually a pretty good dream, isn't it? Even if it is kinda weird. Ha 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 ha. He threw his head back and loosed a howling laughter. Udon's sweat dropped. D-dream. He muttered. Suck on that, world. Naruto shouted to the heavens, ignoring the bespectacled man's weary words. I am the Hokage. Sarada winced, hearing those words. Leaping across the rooftops toward the Uzumaki family home, She anxiously adjusted her glasses and tried to convince herself that this shout was just a coincidence. Biting her lip, she bounded from one roof to the next, hurtling towards her destination at breakneck speed. "Naruto," she whispered. "I think we've made a grave mistake. The jutsu didn't work the way we expected. We weren't the ones to travel through time. And our parents were complete idiots," she thought as well. Sarada shuddered, recalling how her mom had reacted to the news that, not only was she married to Sasuke, but she also had a teenage daughter as well. "It's kinda weird how old he is, and I don't get why he's missing an arm," Sakura had said conversationally, eager to start gossiping. "But once I get past all of that, Sasuke-kun's still really cool, isn't he? And so dreamy, too, don't you think?" Sarada turned a bit green around the gills, so to speak, just remembering those words. Her family life had never been what she would call normal, but she had never before been asked such an awkward question by her mom. Sakura, it seemed, did not completely grasp the little things about what Sarada being her daughter meant, and acted more like the young woman was a sister or older friend. As in, Sakura did not shy away from asking Sarada all kinds of uncomfortable questions about her sex life with Sasuke. No psychologically healthy person wanted to contemplate the idea of their parents having sex, and Sarada was no different. Nor did she want to hear her mom gush about how big her dad's sword had felt, or to be asked to speculate on how good her dad was in bed. Sakura Uchiha had been a pervert for as long as Sarada could remember. "Mama's dirty," she used to say in exasperation whenever her mom so much as blushed or giggled, but never before had the woman been so gauche to talk this directly about such matters with her daughter. No teenager ever wanted to have that kind of girl talk with their mother. Mortification abounding, Sarada took a deep breath and silently pushed these memories to the deepest, darkest corners of her psyche. Let a shrink deal with that matter somewhere down the line. For now, she just wanted to straighten out this fuster-cluck of a mess. By the time the Uzumaki house was in sight, Sarada couldn't see anyone outside it. She had definitely heard the Lord Seventh laughing and cheering earlier, but when she reached the place the noises had been coming from he was already gone. Her eyes flickered scarlet for a sec, and she scanned over the area to see if she could find any suspicious traces. She saw nothing. Deactivating her Sharingan, Sarada then performed a simple sensory jutsu. Bolt's chakra was inside the house, along with another, significantly weaker chakra. The general texture of the second signature betrayed similar affinities to Bolt, and the color was similar to Himawari's, virtually identical to Lady Hinata's chakra, save that it was vast orders of magnitude smaller and lighter. Weaker. Much, much, much weaker. Himawari had to have at least thrice as much chakra as this person, and hers was denser as well, thick with a firstborn daughter's share of her father's life force and mother's spirit energy. Whoever this was, they had a chakra like that of Lady Hinata, in shade and hue, but one that was infinitely less in every measurable way. It reminded her of how her parents' chakras had looked. Like but unlike how it should have been, smaller and feebler and lacking much of the richness and subtle nuance they had acquired through decades of use and mastery. This seemed to confirm Sarada's sneaking suspicions. In hindsight, she should have expected something like this from the name of the technique. Seijin Koshinjikan Mawashi. A sigh. "We are so grounded when they get back," Sarada said. "I just know it." Hinata woke without a sound, blinking her way owlishly back into the world of the living. She was lying on the floor, she noticed absently, but this fact was of minimal concern to her conscious mind. She was too absorbed in recollections of that wonderful dream. Me and Naruto-kun in a bed together, she thought wistfully, her lips quirking into a tiny smile. Ah, if only it were true. Idly, a part of her hoped that Naruto would grow up to be as handsome as the adult him she had been lying with in her dream. Not that she didn't think he was cute or charming now, but, well, the Naruto in her dream had been hot with a capital H. Hinata nearly swooned just thinking about it, her cheeks aflame. She clung to the details of the dream as she stirred, refusing to let the memories fade. Lately she had been suffering from nightmares due to stress over the graduation exams, and even passing Kurenye-sensei's personal test hadn't done much to assuage Hinata's anxiety. But she felt almost none of that, now. Her mind seemed, clearer, somehow, less frantically energetic. She felt calmer than she had in a very long time, and despite her lingering fears Hinata found that a part of her was quite content to merely sit up for a moment and bathe in the details of her remembered dream. Her recollections of that wonderful fantasy seemed amazingly clear, nothing like the transient, fleeting substance of dreams. Why, if Hinata didn't know any better, she'd think she was remembering something that had actually happened. Yet that was impossible, sadly enough. Maybe one day, if all the stars aligned in heaven and the earth itself was moved to pity her lot. If pigs grew wings and all her relatives danced naked in the street, and the sky turned green where the grass grew blue, and the sun was snuffed and the moon was dropped, and all the world came crashing to an end. It seemed terribly unlikely to her, was the point she was getting at. Regardless of any assets she may or may not have had at her disposal, and regardless of what one might think of her attractiveness or possible lack thereof, it could not be denied that 12-year-old Hinata Hyuga was terribly shy and horrendously insecure. She could barely even bring herself to speak in her crush's presence. Lack of self-confidence had done in far greater men and women than she, and Hinata was at a delicate age. Fear of rejection paralyzed her, and in the face of this overwhelming dread she could muster no more courage than to watch from afar and dream idly, hopefully, of one day managing to approach him. So Hinata appropriately relished the memory of a firm and muscular body, nearly naked, flawless dusky skin reddening with a flush, and the glimpse of something she was sure her more conservative relatives would be abjectly scandalized to find her staring at. But in the realm of such a perfect dream, Hinata had felt no shame in taking the time to appreciate what she saw. Even if the view proved too much for her to handle even in her dream, the real Hinata was able to savor it, finding in the belief of this event's unreality the courage and composure to replay the image in her mind's eye, committing it to memory with all the attentiveness of a girl in love. Dimly, she perceived that she was not in her bedroom. Part of Hinata grew mildly distressed by this, worried that something might have happened, but the rest of her still felt oddly at ease, and was taking the time to bask in the lingering memories of her dream. Absent-mindedly, Hinata stood up. She did not think about it at first, because it did not initially register to the girl in her distracted state, but the floor seemed awfully far away, didn't it? If she had been paying attention she might have felt a slightest rush of vertigo, her conscious mind expecting to fall given how high her head was. Yet her feet somehow managed to reach all the way down. And what was that weight on her chest? Unconsciously rubbing one of her shoulders, Hinata chanced to look down. She barely noticed how far away her feet were. The only thing she could see was those. Hinata's mind went blank. She stared down at her chest, uncomprehending. Certainly, she had read once that stressful environments could cause girls to go through puberty prematurely, a leftover survival mechanism, perhaps, from a time when such stress meant predators or other dangers liable to cut life short, making it crucial to pass on one's genes as soon as possible. She'd started blooming earlier than any of the other girls in her class, and had become used to the inconvenient reality of those lumps hanging from her chest no matter how hard she trained. But this was just ridiculous. This was... well, she simply had no words for it. Her initial thought, seeing it, was something along the lines of watermelons. That was the first impression she got from the size and shape of what she saw, until her eyes processed the color, the cloth covering, and the fact that these objects were quite clearly protruding from her chest. Blink. Blink. Hinata stared. Hinata stared some more. Hinata stared for a very long time at her breasts. Huge, she thought disbelievingly. How on earth did they get so? Blankly, she grabbed at the, not mounds, that was too little a word. They were more like mountains, than anything else. Except that they were soft. Very, very soft. And rounded. More like torpedoes, or bombshells. Or teardrops. There came a knock at the door, and Hinata gave a start. She nearly jumped right out of her skin. Letting go of her grand tetons, she belatedly remembered that she was in an unfamiliar room. Meep. She squeaked under her breath, biting her lip. More loudly, trying to inject even an ounce of confidence into her voice as she trembled, a million worst-case scenarios running through her mind at a mile a minute, she said, who is it? Mom. A voice spoke, a young man's voice with more tenor than bass. You okay in there? Dad was acting weird. I think he's come down with something. How about you? Need me to get you anything? Hinata blinked rapidly, several times in quick succession. She stared at the door, and without even realizing it her eyes began to tense and flex, veins bulging out with no need for instruction. Her body seemed to channel the chakra almost of its own volition, without any need for conscious thought on her part. Byakugan activated of its own accord. She did not even need to will as much, let alone form the hand seals to help herself knead her chakra to feed and awaken those ravenous eyes. She barely needed to focus on where she wanted to look, some unconscious aspect of the visual cortex was already committing most of its resources to analyzing a point directly 1.7 meters in front of her, just outside the door. Hinata stared at a teenager with 2 whisker marks on either cheek, a markedly familiar face, and wavy blonde hair vaguely reminiscent of a leaf in the shape of its styling. Everything from the face to the hair to the familiar arch of those lips and squint of those eyes reminded her of Naruto, but she also saw a little more. If Hinata looked at herself in a mirror, she might see a number of familiar traits in herself that this youth possessed. His ears, the bridge of his nose, the shape of his chin. Aspects from her own face, touches of a distinctly gracile hyuga bone structure mixed with a certain subtle broadness and robustness Hinata had come to associate with her crush. Even the color of his skin seemed to be a blend of her and Naruto's complexions, lighter than his but darker than hers. Had she not known any better, Hinata would have thought, for an instant, that this young man could only be her and Naruto's son. But that was impossible, right? And yet, he called her mom. And also, there was still the curious matter of... Again, Hinata looked down at her breasts. This time, with her Byakugan active, she noticed a plethora of other differences as well. From the length of the arms and legs, to the width of the pelvis, to hints of faint wrinkling and stretch marks in her skin, to a number of faint scars within and without that only a jujutsu user could see with the naked eye, and also to what looked like signs of healed-over tearing in her. Well, let it simply be said that Hinata saw signs that she had long since learned to associate with women who had given birth at least once. Possibly twice. She blinked. Noticing a mild, chronic-seeming ache in her shoulders, Hinata deduced that this wasn't a dream. Looking at the flow of chakra in her body, she could also see no obvious signs of genjutsu. Oddly, though, her chakra looked thinly spread and rather anemic within her circulatory system, like pipes accustomed to the diversion of floods were hosting aught but the merest trickle. Before Hinata could wonder any more about this, she felt her range of vision shrink and distort back into a limited human perception. It swam for a moment, and her head felt awfully light. The last thing she thought, before the floor came rushing up to meet her, was a confused and bleary. Have I already used up that much chakra? Hinata lost consciousness, as much from exhaustion as shock. She hit the floor with a thud. Chapter 29, Feline Style, Bag Escape Jutsu. Oh, hell. I am so sorry. We never should have done something that stupid. Sasuke stared pensively into the cup of tea sitting before him, remembering the words of the young woman who had called herself his daughter. He hummed in the back of his throat, unconsciously trying to grab the cup with his left hand. But there wasn't a hand there. Not much of an arm, either. He scowled and let out a sigh. Time travel, is it? He muttered. It was hard to believe. He probably never would have accepted such a thing as true, if not for the convincing case that girl, his daughter, Sarada, had made. He was in the future. A future where he had settled down and started a family. Presumably, this meant his future self had succeeded in killing Itachi. She'd been oddly tight-lipped on that topic. Sasuke hummed. Opposite him sat Sakura Haruno, his teammate. And, apparently, his wife. On one hand, Sasuke could somewhat kind of appreciate the choice his other self had apparently made. She was an intelligent girl, and honestly a little closer to his tastes than he would, in pride, be willing to admit. Had he not been so driven to distraction for so many years with determination to avenge his family, and had she not joined up with the rest of his squealing fangirls, he might have honestly considered an interest in her. Not that he would ever confess as much. Especially not now, with the girl so starry-eyed and staring at him from across the table. If there had ever been a time when Sasuke Uchiha truly and hopelessly cursed his unwanted ability to make girls go gaga over him, it was now. It boggled the mind. Sasuke didn't see himself as a charming person. He had no idea what all those girls saw in him, to be frank. He was bitter, asocial, wrapped in darkness and scarred by grief. The phrase damaged goods surely existed solely to describe people like himself. He was not the kind of person that he thought a smart or self-respecting girl should pursue. Couldn't they see how messed up he was? How dangerous a path he would have to walk. It galled Sasuke that so many girls should be so smitten with him. It felt insulting, somehow, like their infatuation devalued the tragedy of his clan's destruction, romanticizing his pain and frustration into an unrecognizable caricature of the person he really was. Their smiling, giggling, blushing, and cooing all angered him. Like they saw it all as one big game, like they didn't take anything seriously. They didn't get it. They refused to understand. Sasuke was too different. He couldn't relate to them, couldn't comprehend them. He wasn't like them. Grimacing, he grabbed the teacup with his right hand, then took a sip of its contents. He refused to look Sakura in the eye. "You're so handsome, dear Red Heart," she tittered, undeterred by his attempt to ignore her presence. Her eyes twinkled with glee. Sigh. Sasuke set down his cup. "We're not married," he told her. "That's not what our daughter said," Sakura replied, waving a hand and smiling indulgently. "She's not our daughter," Sasuke replied. "She's the daughter of another Sasuke, and another Sakura. You didn't give birth to her, your other self did. I never married you. But we will," Sakura said, clapping her hands and squealing. "This is the future, Sasuke-kun. We're destined to be together." "What good is destiny?" Sasuke muttered. "If I had any choice in the matter, my family." He went quiet, pensive. Sakura's smile faltered. Despite her exuberance and cheer at discovering that she was married to Sasuke-kun in at least this future, she was still leagues better at reading the atmosphere than people like, say, Naruto. Her expression fell, and she looked down into her own tea. Not another word was spoken for several minutes. Quietly, awkwardly, the two of them sipped their tea. All at once, after a lengthy quiet, there came a knock at the door. The sudden noise was jarring, and both adult-bodied preteens jumped in their seats. "Sakura-san? Sasuke-san? Are you home?" "Bolt." Sarada's voice rang through the air, and the Uchiha appeared with the faintest flicker of movement. Her hair was a mess and her face was red. She appeared harried and disheveled. Her glasses had slid halfway down the bridge of her nose, and she only took a second to push them back up before ejaculating. "Bolt, Bolt. Crap, we've really messed up," she said frantically. The blonde turned to look at her. His parents' bedroom door was open, and it looked like he had been seconds away from bolting inside. An irritated look crossed his face, and he glowered impatiently at Sarada. "Not now," he said. "I just heard Mom collapse. She must be really sick." Sarada frowned thoughtfully, and she seemed to hesitate for a second. "Collapse? Odd." She narrowed her eyes. "But, Bolt, I have to know. Were either of your parents acting strange this morning?" Bolt grimaced and formed a shadow clone. He nodded to the construct, and his Kagebunshin headed into the bedroom. Then he crossed his arms over his chest and turned to face Sarada, giving off a weary and long-suffering sigh. "Strange," he said. "This had better be important. If my mum's got anything serious." He glared warningly. The boy was nearly as protective of his mother as he was of his sister, and once he started worrying about them there was very, very little that could make him stop. Some of his snarkier peers had teased Bolt about having a sister/Oedipus complex more than once. And joking or not, there was a tiny seed of truth there. Himawari and Hinata Uzumaki were very up Boruto's list of priorities, and even his maybe not girlfriend rarely took precedence. Sarada knew this, and she nodded, collecting her thoughts for a moment before continuing. "Please answer my question first," she said, her expression strained. "Have they been acting strange?" Bolt swore and threw his hands up in the air. "Yes, fine. Dad has," he answered snippily. Mom also sounded a little out of it before she collapsed. His expression then became a perplexed one. with just a hint of pink dusting his cheeks, when the sound of his shadow clone dispelling reached their ears. Furrowing his brow, Bold shook his head, clearly trying to get an image of some sort out of his mind's eye. Chakra exhaustion, he said, bemused. How the heck would she have chakra exhaustion this early in the morning? She and Dad didn't even get out of bed until recently, as far as I know. Sarada hummed thoughtfully. I thought so, she said. Their bodies are used to having much greater amounts of chakra flowing through them, so now that their reserves are so much smaller it's like a sort of chakra anemia. Anemia? Bold said. Then he shook his head. Wait, what? Why would their reserves be smaller? The hell are you talking about? Kinpo, Sijin Koshinjikan Mawashi no Jutsu, Sarada intoned, adjusting her glasses with a grimace. Forbidden technique, art of adult child body temporal revolving. Or, in layman's terms, a time travel jutsu that takes a person's consciousness and sends it into the past, by switching that present consciousness with a past incarnation. Bold blinked. Wait, you mean, huh? That jutsu worked. He gawked for a moment, stunned. Then he scowled. Damn it. If you knew that was how it worked, then why did you go along with it? Idiot. Sarada hit him on the head. As if I knew then. I've just put it all together after realizing. She gave him a meaningful look, and gestured into the bedroom. Bolt's jaw dropped as he connected the dots. We switched our parents' brains with the brains of their past selves. Maybe not literally, said Sarada, since they seem able to walk around in their bodies. But their minds? Definitely. Fuck, Bold moaned. We are so dead if they ever find out. Let alone if Shikamaru-san finds out, Sarada said. I heard your dad shouting a little earlier, he sounded very, excited about being Hokage. Bold paled as the realization struck. How old are they? Do you know? He asked, looking fearful. Mom and Dad said they were 12, Sarada answered. And you left them unattended. Bold gaped, disbelieving. I'm not the one whose dad is the Hokage, Sarada retorted. Bold's heart stopped for just a second. My dad's the Hokage, he whispered. That idiot who doesn't even know what amnesia is the man responsible for, Oh, shit. Is it that bad? Sarada asked, a little caught off guard by the severity of Bolt's reaction. I thought he was just playing a really bad joke. Bolt murmured in response. But, shit, I know he was dead last in his year, way back when, but, was he really that stupid? You weren't exactly the brightest yourself, at his age, Sarada replied. I was practically top of the class. Bolt riposted, sounding almost like a whine. Having good grades doesn't preclude you from doing stupid things, Sarada said. Which you most certainly did do. In spades. She gave him a faintly baleful look. Bolt pouted. Sheesh, you're awfully pissy this morning. He muttered. I have seen things no woman should ever have to see, Sarada hissed, glaring so hard that her Sharingan automatically activated. Do not try me today, Boruto. Bolt was silent for a moment. Shikamaru's going to kill us when he finds out, isn't he? Sarada grimaced. Slowly and painfully. He was the Hokage. This was his office. It was a dream come true, except for one odd detail. Naruto stared at the heap of papers on his desk. It looked high enough that if he sat down in the seat no one would be able to see his face. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Hey, what's with all this? He asked the bespectacled guy who'd guided him here. Paperwork, said Udon bluntly. Naruto nodded. Yeah, he said. So what's it doing on my desk? Waiting for your signature, Udon replied, giving Naruto an odd look. Wait, you mean this is all mine? Naruto trailed off, his expression turning into one of dawning horror. Sir. Udon said, frowning. Are you feeling okay? No, Naruto said. I feel like this dream has turned into a nightmare. Weakly, Udon chuckled. You have an amusing sense of humor as ever, sir, he said deferentially. But really, we must get a start on these forms. Mizu Kage-sama is requesting a Kage summit to discuss the increase of pirate activity in Mizu no Kuni's waters, and Kaze Kage-sama wants to adjust tariffs on imported goods. In addition, the daimyo has commissioned an A-rank mission to guard his nephew at an upcoming marriage interview with the daughter of the Land of Snow's daimyo, and the Land of Waves wants to renegotiate some old trade agreements. Also, your daughter's academy instructors want to talk to you about the possibility of early graduation. I know where you normally stand on this matter, but they are quite insistent that she would have nothing to gain from another year of schooling. I honestly think there might be some merit to the idea. Naruto was stock still for a moment as all of this sank in. He stared blankly at Udon, and his jaw slowly dipped lower and lower as the bespectacled shinobi continued to read off a mental itinerary. Oh, hell. What was all this? Is that my work for the week? Naruto inquired with a pale face and nervous expression. The week. Udon quizzically parroted. This is just the stuff that's piled up since this morning. Naruto let out a sound that was unequivocally the least manly noise this body had produced since the last time the Hokage's personal physician had ordered him to cut back on his sodium intake. Specifically, by cutting ramen out of his diet. Permanently. The tearful, shameless whining and begging that had filled the doctor's office on that day was almost as pitiful as the noise that now escaped him. I think I'm gonna go on vacation, Naruto whimpered, turning to head for the door. He didn't get to make more than a single step before freezing up. And just where do you think you're going, Nanadime-san? This voice reached Naruto's ears. He did not recognize the speaker, but the tone was enough to send a dagger of ice shooting through his gut. Against his will, Naruto turned around and came face to face with a darkly glowering, goateed, and ponytailed man. Despite years of stress lining the man's face around the mouth and eyes, and the unfamiliar facial hair, Naruto found himself immediately knowing who this person was. The resemblance was that strong. Shikamaru. He gaped. With a twitching eye and veins throbbing in his temple, the man was a truly frightful sight. And while Shikamaru wasn't exactly looking serene to begin with, he was much calmer outwardly than he was on the inside. Even Naruto was perceptive enough to see the anger simmering beneath the surface. Even Naruto could see this much. The blonde gulped. Shikamaru smiled, except something about the gesture felt more like the naked baring of teeth. A thinly veiled threat. Naruto, Shikamaru said slowly, I know you like to act childish, sometimes, but usually you at least know to become an adult when it's time to work. No one wants to deal with responsibility, but as men we have to grin and bear it. So you had better have a very good excuse for taking so long to come in. Naruto whimpered in spite of himself. He was rooted to the spot. It felt like his feet were nailed to the floor, only without any of the obvious pain that would come with that. I didn't know I was supposed to come. He said weakly. Shikamaru glared. Normally, Naruto, I'd let you off the hook for something like this, he said lowly. You're usually a pretty reliable guy, and I can accept that your job is even more demanding than mine in some ways, so naturally there'll be times when you want to sleep in or take the day off. Heaven knows I don't hesitate to do as much when I think I can get away with it. Shikamaru shook his head, a vein throbbing harder. But how old do you think you are? He asked, the question clearly rhetorical. You're an adult, Naruto. If you're going to come in late, then use your telephone to call and let us know. Quick question. Naruto interjected, his hand shooting up into the air. What's a telephone? For a moment, Shikamaru stared. He twitched once, twice. Silently, menacingly he reached behind his back and drew a razor-edged tesson. Fast as a bolt of lightning, he snapped the fan closed and whipped it through the air, straight at Naruto's head. The blonde managed to just barely dodge on reflex, reacting before his brain had even begun to register the threat. 3 severed yellow locks of hair drifted to the floor. Wah! What the hell? Naruto yelped. Don't swing that around. You could have taken my head off, you crazy bastard. What are you talking about, Hokage-sama? Shikamaru said in an even tone. It's just a harisen. The natural thing to do when someone says something that's stupid is to smack them on the head with a harisen, right? He flicked the fan out again, and Naruto again found himself ducking beneath a stroke so quickly he didn't even see what was happening. He heard the sound of steel striking wood, a sharp scraping, and cautiously looked up to see a deep, clean, horizontal gash in the door. A Harisen is supposed to be harmless. Naruto protested, leaping out of the way of another swipe. It's just a folded paper fan that makes a loud noise when it hits. This thing is the exact opposite of that. Shikamaru smiled. When dealing with an idiot on the level of a Hokage, it's only natural for a Harisen to be clad in iron and sharpened to a hair-splitting edge, he said. That's the minimum amount of threat needed to hammer something into your head, isn't it? He turned the fan sideways and spread it, smacking Naruto atop the head with the flat of the tessen. You dodged all the dangerous swings, after all, Shikamaru said, smiling more genuinely now. He looked calmer, less annoyed and ready to strangle his boss for breathing too loudly. Naruto's sweat dropped. So you're admitting it's dangerous? He muttered. Oh, don't make a fuss, Shikamaru said dismissively, putting the fan away. If that was all it took to harm you, you would have never made the cut for Hokage. So quit complaining and let's get to work, okay? You're not a kid anymore. I'm not the one who was bitching. Naruto snapped. And even if this is a dream, I'm still. He paused. Wait. Naruto dimly raised a hand to rub the crown of his head. I felt that, he said slowly, his eyes widening infinitesimally. Even if it wasn't very painful, it still hurt. But that can't be right. Dreams aren't supposed to hurt, are they? Hokage-sama, said Udon, standing by the door. What are you talking about? Why do you keep saying dream this, and dream that? Did you hit your head this morning? I did when this jackass hit me, Naruto peevishly muttered, jabbing a finger at Shikamaru. The goateed man snorted. So what, do you think this is all a dream or something, Naruto? He deadpanned. Isn't it? Naruto frustratedly replied, throwing his hands up in the air. Shikamaru stared at Naruto for several long seconds. He frowned, and opened his mouth to say something. But he was interrupted by the door flying wide open, Mogi bursting into the room. Shikamaru-sama! Shikamaru-sama! She breathlessly exclaimed. We have a situation. Sasuke-san and Sakura-san are. Sasuke and Sakura walked into the office behind her. The former was trying and failing to affect a stoic demeanor, while the latter did not even try to hide her horror. Both stared at Naruto, recognizing him immediately despite his aged-up appearance. Oh god, this really is a bad future, isn't it? Sasuke said, his face paling. Is that idiot seriously the Hokage? Ihihi, on the one hand, I'm married to Sasuke-kun. Sakura whispered. But on the other hand, Naruto is the Hokage. She shuddered. Naruto brightened immediately, completely failing to read the mood, and leaped over to Sakura. Sakura-chan! He cheered, throwing his arms wide. Wanna go on a date? She punched him in the face. Ew! No way! Sakura protested. I'm married to Sasuke-kun, now. Several things happened at once, then. Firstly, Sakura's body channeled chakra into her fist, as much chakra as it could muster, and released it all at once at the moment of impact. With her chakra reserves as small as they were, this punch was only a fraction of its potential strength, and the amount of chakra it expelled was enough to leave the girl woozy. Secondly, while Sakura's punch was only at a fraction of its usual power, this was still more than enough to send Naruto flying across the room with a broken nose gouting blood into the air. He crashed into his desk and tipped it over, sending the papers flying everywhere at once. Naruto went out like a light. Thirdly, Bolt and Sarada had in fact been in the process of bringing a bleary-eyed Hinata to the Hokage's office when Naruto threw himself at Sakura, and in response to the blonde's cry Hinata slumped into a black gloom. She became instantly despondent and refused to react to any jostling or jolting on her carrier's parts. Her soul looked ready to leak out of her mouth, and all color had evacuated from her face. Fourthly, Shikamaru, with this new influx of information brought by Sasuke and Sakura's behavior and comments, along with his pre-existing knowledge of the various time travel jutsu Naruto had sealed away in the Forbidden Scroll, had enough data and context to add the values up and come to a conclusion. He stared around the room at the bloody, insensate Nanadime, the wobbling, dizzy chief medic, the visibly perturbed Sasuke, the gloomy Hinata, and the guilty looks on Bolt and Sarada's faces. A vein throbbed in his forehead. Oy vey. He sighed. Naruto. Sarada. Exactly what did you two do to your parents? The teens' backs went ramrod straight, and they froze on the spot. Not just from Shikamaru's shadow possession jutsu, either. Listening to the pair's nervous chuckles, Shikamaru sourly marched them into the office. The door slammed shut. Explain, Shikamaru repeated. Now. Bolt and Sarada fearfully gulped. The story tumbled out of the teens' mouths like water from a faucet, splashing all over the place in an incoherent mess. Bolt was babbling uncontrollably, and Sarada seemed to be confessing every slightest transgression she'd committed in the last 10 years, from jaywalking to copying off of classmates' homework to misfiling mission reports and neglecting to correct the errors. Shikamaru towered over the pair, seeming much taller than usual in his silent wrath. It was only natural for the Hokage's right-hand man to be on the imposing side, whether physically or psychologically, and Shikamaru, Shadow Buddha, Nara was no exception. Even the son and favored successor of the Hokage, Naruto, and Sarada respectively, were not immune to retribution from the man they called the century's greatest strategist. Yammering anxiously away, they spilled the beans in a tangled jumble of words, talking over one another and bouncing back and forth in tense, setting, voice, and tone. It was all over the place, and most people wouldn't have been able to make heads or tails of the panicked confession. But Shikamaru quietly listened with his arms folded over his chest, eyes closed, nodding to himself once or twice as the picture unfolded in his mind. He sorted through the story as it was told, analyzing the account on multiple levels simultaneously as they told it. Finally, he had enough to go on and raised a hand up, holding it palm outward to silence the pair. Okay, he said, sighing long-sufferingly. That's enough. I think I get the picture. Shaking his head, Shikamaru looked from Sakura, who was leaning against Sasuke, to Sasuke, who was blushing and trying to gingerly shift Sakura off of him, to Hinata, who was moping beside a sympathetic-looking Mogi, to Naruto, whose broken nose was being tended to by udon. Then he let his gaze fall on Sarada and Bolt. A vein throbbed in his forehead, and his left eye twitched. If you two weren't who you are, Shikamaru said slowly, dangerously, I'd have you arrested on the spot for tampering with the Forbidden Scroll and performing an outlawed kinjutsu. Some villages would consider that sufficient grounds for charges of high treason. Bolt and Sarada nervously gulped. Considering the circumstances, however, I know better, Shikamaru added, continuing on. He gave both teens a penetrating glance. You kids are both special cases, in a sense, loath as I am to admit it. We can't just execute you or put you in the stocks for this. Mostly because Hokage-sama has outlawed or heavily regulated most of the more barbaric forms of punishment you might have earned with a stunt like this in the past, but also partly because of your relationships to him. Either as his son, or one of his personally favored choices for succession. For a moment, Bolt and Sarada looked like they were about to breathe a sigh of relief. Shikamaru smirked. So, instead, I'll leave the bulk of your punishment up to your parents, once they get back. His eyes gleamed with an almost sadistic pleasure, seeing the immediate, terrified reaction this statement elicited from the kids. And, make no mistake, they will get back. Oh, of course, Shikamaru. Naruto stammered. We'll help reverse the jutsu, of course. Right. Sarada yelped. We'll do whatever it takes to get them back. Shikamaru nodded. I know, he said. And you'll be wearing these until they do get back. With a gesture of his hand, a tendril of shadow appeared pulling something out of a closet in the office. The Cage Yoshi tentacle twisted around to reveal its load to the two teens. Bolt and Sarada stared. Two gaudy signboards reading "We will not mess around with forbidden jutsu" were dangled in front of their faces. Bold, colorful, traffic cone orange was the color of the boards, and the lettering was done in sharp, glossy black. The colors alone made it clear this was something the Nanadime had personally made. Paling significantly, the teens nervously swallowed. Shikamaru afforded them a cold smile. Now put them on and get to work, he said. Why yes sir. Bolt and Sarada squeaked, snapping off fearful salutes. They took the proffered boards and draped them over their torsos. But after doing this they hesitated for a moment, as if unsure how to proceed next. I assume you have notes on the jutsu? Shikamaru said. Yeah, Bolt replied. But I gave them to Sarada last night. What did you do with them? He turned and asked her. Sarada flushed. They're at my house, she answered. Go get them, then, Shikamaru said. Both of you. Udon can go with, once he's done treating Lord Sevier, Naruto. He caught himself at the last moment, making a mental note to call up Kakashi and ask him a favor. The teens gaped. But that's halfway across town. Sarada squeaked. She looked down at the signboards she and Boruto had been forced to don, anxiously fiddling with one of the straps over her shoulders. Her face was beet red, and her eyes as wide as dinner plates. Shikamaru was unmoved. This is part of your punishment, he coolly replied. Maybe a healthy dose of public humiliation will make you kids think twice the next time you consider messing with Kinjutsu. Bolt and Sarada blushed and gulped. Ah, of course, Shikamaru-san. They said. Shikamaru narrowed his eyes. That's Sama to you. Yes, Shikamaru-sama. They squealed. Chapter 30, Timey-wimey wibbly wobbly. Chunin Exams Stadium. Timeline Beta. The past. A clamor arose as Naruto and Sasuke headed back to the other exam participants. Spectating nobles ordered their attendants to make notes on the performance of the finalists, already mentally calculating bids for those young ninja to carry out missions for them. Local shinobi who weren't completely dispirited by the level of this fight likewise started revising their training regimens from the ground up. Konoha's civilians, on the other hand, were in a state of shock, cheering out of patriotism but privately chilled with fear at the revelation of Naruto and Sasuke's power. In particular, those who had alienated, ignored, or neglected the former were quite frankly petrified. Naruto had never been outright abused, no matter what some writers might insist, at least not in any traditionally understood sense of the word. He was cared for as an infant, bottle-fed and all that, and as a young child he had a roof over his head and food on the table, thanks to Konoha's deftly managed social welfare programs, but he'd always been alone. An outcast. That was all it took to mess a kid up, and it was all that had happened to him. He wasn't chased by angry mobs or beaten halfway to death by vengeful drunks, although there certainly were shopkeepers who'd chased him away in the past, worried that his presence would scare away their customers. And yes, parents told their kids to stay away from him, and some people muttered darkly when they saw him. But that was the extent of it. And while that was certainly enough to make the civilians of Konoha, and a few of its shinobi as well, fear a little for their safety, it was more due to the fact that many of them still associated Naruto to some degree with the Ninetales, a connection that had only been strengthened by the giant, fox-shaped shroud of chakra he'd used in his fight against Sasuke, than any worry over retribution for significant trespasses. From their perspective, it wasn't like they'd done anything wrong. They hadn't kicked or cursed or molested him or anything like that. Sure, parents warned their kids to stay away from Naruto, and most others steered clear of him, but that was for their own safety. Sealing was a very esoteric discipline, and even among shinobi there were few who truly understood the most advanced techniques. As far as they knew, the only thing holding the fox back was a bit of ink and chakra. To the civilians, who had seen the Ninetales shatter buildings with just its roar, and rend through steel and concrete and solid wood with aught but the air pressure from swipes of its claws, this seemed incredible, and too good to be true. Even those elite ninja who understood how Fuinjutsu worked had reason to be wary. Just looking at the history of Biju in the other villages, whether Shukaku and Sunagaku, or the Hachibi in Kumo, there were ample reports of Jinchuriki being overtaken by the beasts within them and going on destructive or murderous rampages. The Kyuubi's own history in Konoha was a much better kept secret, known only to the eldest and most highly ranked. So it wasn't like they avoided Naruto just to be assholes. There were legitimate reasons for them to be wary, and considerable historical precedent for the unpredictability of Jinchuriki. Even if ignorant civilians or younger ninja did not understand all of this, they could be excused when even many of those who did understand were cautious of Naruto. Not that this meant it was intelligent or sensible of them to alienate the boy, but fear and memories of loss rarely led people to make rational decisions. Aside from citizens of the Leaf who were old enough to know the secret of Naruto's tenant, though, most of the rest of the people in the audience were simply amazed. Whether it was Konoha kids and fellow genin, or foreign dignitaries and spectators, or even villagers from outlying townships, they applauded the match. Holy crap, since when have genin been so powerful? Some older ninja said incredulously. The Uchiha clan really must have been something, to produce a kid like that. Said others. Kaie. Wow. They're both actually really cute, aren't they? So cool. Red Heart gushed an exceptional number of girls, and a lesser but not insignificant number of boys, within the age range of the winner and his opponent. Aren't they teammates? Mused a couple people. Their sensei is Kakashi Hatake, right? That, Sherry non-hero, from the Battle of Konobe Bridge. And he was taught by the Yellow Flash, at least one person responded to the previous. Who was taught by the Toad Sage, who was taught by the Professor, who was taught by the first and second Hokage. Geez, talk about a privileged legacy. Those kids seem destined for greatness, don't they? And a handful of spies from other villages, secreted away in the stadiums, mentally prepared their next reports. Holy shit, thought one Iwa informant. I don't think even the Yellow Flash was anywhere near that strong. I'm not sure if even Chushikage-sama is that strong, given his age. She shuddered. Konoha has some real monsters in this new generation. Akiri spy mused elsewhere. His hands were trembling, and his face was ashen white. I don't think it would even be possible to assassinate them. He gulped. An agent from Kumo scribbled out a terse, encoded report on a small scroll and slipped it into a secure case on his summoned owl's leg. Its contents wouldn't make sense to anyone who didn't have the key, but even if they did, the brevity of the message wouldn't lend much clarity without exact context. We are so fucked. Are you guys for real? Ino pointed from Naruto to Sasuke, seeming utterly bewildered. She looked back and forth between the two boys, gaping disbelievingly. Seriously, what the hell was that? How? Even for someone like Sasuke-kun, that was. So much for not setting too high a bar, Shikamaru muttered. Now Mom will never get off my case about training more. Yeesh, I got exhausted just watching you two go at it. Naruto grinned and scratched the back of his neck sheepishly. Sorry. We eat our vegetables, he fibbed, blatantly sidestepping the question. Meh, we're just that talented, was Sasuke's response, in turn. Sakura stepped forward, chortling, and put a hand on the latter's shoulder. She winked. I hope you don't plan on changing into new clothes. She joked, looking at her man's tattered shorts and bare chest. More quietly, she purred, it may be scrawnier than I'm used to, but my darling's body is my darling's body, at the end of the day. No fair, Ino whined, overhearing this. Even though you tease me like that, you're still into. I'm into a lot of things, Ino-chan Red Heart, Sakura chirped, blowing a kiss to the blonde. But maybe I'll help you find a nice boy for yourself, eh? Ino blushed fiercely. One of her nostrils dripped a single drop of red. Yes, she squeaked. Of course, mistress. Shikamaru looked away and sighed, a bead of sweat streaking down the side of his head. They're all completely mad, he groaned miserably. Ugh. What a drag. Tamari, standing nearby, grimaced and gave him a sympathetic look. Her face was a little pinker than usual, but the smile was genuine enough, and she nodded in agreement with his conclusion. I know that feeling, she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Shikamaru, with his genius intellect, could not help thinking of the fact that Naruto had flashed this girl with a harem jutsu modeled after himself not an hour earlier. He guessed that there was no way Tamari could have forgotten it so quickly, and no doubt the images were dancing through her head even as she voiced her sympathies. It took an unusual amount of willpower on the Nara's part to keep himself from jumping to conclusions at the fact that Tamari was able to look him in the eye after that and only have a small blush, wondering whether her lack of apparent disgust in regards to him was because of emotional maturity or because, well, she had liked what she'd seen. Aside from a liberty or two between the legs, Naruto's sexy jutsu had been remarkably accurate. Shikamaru struggled not to let his brain run away from him with thoughts like this. To distract himself from these thoughts, Shikamaru latched onto something else instead. So Naruto really is the vessel of the Nine Tails, after all, he commented, changing the subject and looking at the blonde. Naruto grinned and gave him a peace sign. Hee. When do you figure it out? He asked cheerfully, effectively confirming the lad's suspicions. I knew for sure during your fight, Shikamaru said, but I've suspected as much for years. Ever since we joined the academy. Wow, really? Naruto said, laughing. And here I only found out the day I got my headband. Temari gaped. Wait, seriously? She said. That sounds horrendously dangerous. Dad's sealing jutsu was hella powerful, Naruto replied, shrugging it off. There was a moment of silence as those contestants who were born and raised in Konoha processed this information. Jaws dropped after a few moments as the slowly burgeoning lotus of understanding spread its petals within their minds. Hinata smiled indulgently and clasped Naruto's hand. Wasn't that supposed to be a secret? She said in a mildly amused tone. If it was, it wasn't a very well-kept one, Naruto said. Only a complete idiot would miss the resemblance. He then sneezed the instant he finished his sentence. Sasuke stifled a snort. Secret meeting room. Timeline Gamma. The future. It was the kind of scene conspiracy theorists would die to capture on film. The heads of Konoha's most prominent clans, from Aburame to Yamanaka, several of the highest-ranking members of its government, including 2 past Hokage and the present Lord Seventh's trusted advisor, and even a handful of lauded rookies from the new generation. All of them were meeting in a single room, a secure and secret chamber hardened against attack and warded against surveillance, buried deep underneath the Hokage Tower's foundations. A long table was dotted with the bluish-white glow of tablet screens sitting before every occupied chair, automatically scrolling the various graphs and algorithms. In the center of the table, a holographic projector cast the glimmering, 3-dimensional shapes of amorphous starbursts and whirling vortices of cosmic dust into the air. It was pretty, but not particularly meaningful at the moment. There were Lady Tsunade and Lord Kakashi, 5th and 6th Hokage. Hanabi Hyuga, head of the Hyuga, Sai Yamanaka, senior Umbu captain. Shino Aburame, Kiba Inuzuka, Temari Nara, Chuji, and Kurui Akimichi. Kurenai, Mirai, and Kano Amaru Sarutobi. Tenten, Rock Lee, and Might Guy. From clan heads to first-rate shinobi, many of the village's most powerful people were assembled here. Yes, peering around at the occupants of the room, Shikamaru mused that this gathering really was the kind of thing that would get conspiracy theorists foaming at the mouth. From the outside looking in, people would view it as a meeting of the village's highest elite, an eerily inscrutable collective of the most powerful people in Konoha, both martially and politically. And yet, watching as Chuji snacked on a bag of chips, Kiba put his feet up on the table, Sai doodled in his sketchpad, and the others shared juicy bits of gossip and stories of their daily doings, Shikamaru couldn't help but feel like they were all treating this as little more than an ice cream social. How troublesome. Sighing as he thought this, Shikamaru sat down at the head of the table. Usually this was Naruto's seat, a position of authority reserved for the Hokage, but considering recent developments, well, he'd have to take the spot for now. His fingers clicked a brief sequence of keys on the input panel, and the tablets around the table let out little ding sounds as they unlocked access to files and documents relevant to this meeting. Displays brightened, and at once all of the small screens shifted to a directory of links. The assembled figures and persons looked down curiously. Temari was the first one to say anything. "What's all this, then?" she said, tapping the topmost link. "Brain scans, biometrics, preliminary psychiatric evaluations. This is Sakura's medical record," noted Tsunade, looking younger than ever as she perused a list of past illnesses, injuries, and medications. "My sister's is here, too," remarked the young Hyuga clan head, Hanabi. "And her husband's." Kano Amaru looked up, seated beside Hanabi. "Really? Hokage-sama's records as well?" he said, surprised. "I heard rumors of him coming down with some sort of illness this morning, but..." "Ah, even Sasuke-san's records are here," Sai interjected, looking up. It's interesting that the most recent notes are almost all about psychological or neurological tests, though. Is this what my wife left the house in such a rush for? What a tragedy. Opined Lee, his words accompanied by appropriately grandiose gesticulations. To think that Hokage-sama, his wife, and his former teammates could have all fallen sick in a single day. Indeed, said Academy instructor and upcoming Aburame clan head, Shino. A tragedy that would seem as though it had to be caused by enemy action. Why? Because 1 falling sick is natural, 2 falling sick is a coincidence, 3 falling sick is suspicious, but 4 of the village's most prominent figures becoming deathly ill in a single morning. There was a stir around the table at this insinuation, and Shikamaru resisted the urge to massage his temples as voices rose and people started to bicker. What are we doing, wasting time around this table? If someone's tried to assassinate Hinata and Hokage-sama, call up the Umbu and have them find the culprit. Kiba Inyazuka growled, pounding the surface of the table and baring his fangs. Assuming it was the result of an assassination attempt, said the retired Rokudaime, Kakashi Hatake. From what I can see here, their only notable physical problems at present are mild to moderate cases of chakra anemia. And while that is certainly suspicious, they could just be out of shape, suggested Chuji, the Akimichi clan head. Chakra reserves will atrophy if they aren't regularly tapped past a certain extent. A lot of the older, retired members of the Akimichi clan have similar problems. His wife Karui, seated next to him, nodded. Yeah, I'm sure it's nothing, she said. We've got medicine for that. Feed them a diluted soldier pill or 2 and they should be fine. Isn't this a lot more serious than that? Said Tenten, a Jonin and proud owner of a specialty weapons shop, as well as a few of the oldest and most priceless artifacts in the world, that just so happen to be ninja tools. Whether it's illness or enemy action, if Lord Hokage is bedridden, shouldn't we be doing something about that? Indeed. Declared Might Guy from his wheelchair. Now is the time for action. Kurenai rested her forehead in the palm of her hand. Ugh. I am 1,000 times too hungover to deal with him this early in the morning, she muttered. It's almost noon, Mom, said Mirai. My point still stands. The bickering and debating continued, and it looked like tempers were about to flare, especially on the parts of Kiba, Shino, and Hanabi. They were worried about Hinata, no doubt. Kakashi maintained his calm through years of practice, though, likely aided by a keen insight and knack for picking up on small details. Shikamaru hasn't actually told us why he called this meeting, yet, the Lord Sixth noted. I think this matter might be more complicated than we think. Tiredly, Shikamaru nodded. Your students make terrible decisions, Kano Amaru, he said pointedly, turning to face the Sarutobi. Kano Amaru groaned, what have they done this time? Silently, Shikamaru tapped a big red button. The hologram projector flickered, and semi-translucent, 3-dimensional images of 4 familiar figures came to life above the table. Holograms of Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, and Hinata smiled as they rotated in the air. The images shifted, then, and beside each of them a 3-dimensional brain scan split apart into multiple sections with floating, holographic notes, and measurements. Anomalous interactions between brain cells and chakra. Synchronization subnormal. Concluded less than 50% compatibility of present paramental pathways with subject's physical neurology. Higher brain function, personality, and conscious memory show highest disconnect between yin and yang aspects. Brainstem and unconscious sectors appear least affected. Hormone levels within standard deviation for age and gender of subjects. Motor functions and reflexes unchanged. Preliminary psychiatric evaluations inconclusive. Signs of potential Harano effect in subjects may warrant extended observation. Tsunade narrowed her eyes, scanning over the 3D charts and diagrams. Crossing her arms over her chest, she let out a sigh that seemed to carry the full weight of her age. A deceptively youthful-looking visage wrinkled at the brow as she frowned. Shizuna took these notes, didn't she? She shrewdly remarked. I can tell. Humph. Harano effect, though, that's Ino's terminology. This seems to suggest some kind of Yamanaka mind jutsu. But what's a Harano effect? Wondered Mirai, pursing her lips. I've never heard of that, I'm not surprised, said Sai. It's a rare phenomenon, not least of which because it only becomes noticeable under artificial circumstances, and is not widely recognized outside my wife's immediate circle of colleagues. A door opened and Ino walked inside carrying a thick manila folder. All you need to know is that it means a massive headache for all of us, the blonde said smartly, nodding to her acquaintances around the table. Because Hokage-sama, Hinata, Sasuke-kun, and Sakura have effectively regressed into 12-year-olds. Kakashi took a sharp, hissing intake of breath at this. Oh, hell, he groaned. Is that why you called in me and Tsunade-sama? Lord Seventh is not fit for duty in his present state of mind, said Shikamaru with a pained, sympathetic grimace. I'd be happy to take his place, said Kiba smoothly. Really, I'm as qualified as anyone else in this room, aren't I? He grinned and gave a thumbs up. A beat. Sasuke and Sakura being out of commission is unfortunate, Shino remarked as though his former teammate hadn't said anything. Since both are highly ranked elites with numerous responsibilities. Particularly in regards to the latter, it will be difficult adjusting the workloads. Kano Amaru, Lee, Chuji, and Sai could probably split Sasuke's work among themselves, but we have precious few medics of comparable level to Sakura, or in possession of as much administrative experience. Kiba bristled and shot his teammate a black look. Okay, maybe I don't have all the qualifications to fill in for Naruto. He griped, but I'm plenty good enough to cover Sasuke's damn ass. The others summarily ignored him. Aburame-san has a point, Hanabi mused. Especially since we'll also want to divert some of those medics to figuring out a remedy for them. The Hyuga clan has a few private specialists in traumatic brain injuries and the like, if you need them. It's fortunate that Hinata hasn't been active in the field for years, said Kurenai also. At least her status won't be leaving any such vacuums outside her own family, and I'm sure Boruto or Hanabi can take care of Himawari for the time being. Speak for yourself, Kano Amaru moaned. The next installment of Icha Icha is due in a month, and Hinata was writing this one. It'll be a nightmare sorting through her notes. I just hope this whole matter can be fixed and done with shortly, you know. At least a third of the people sitting around the table grew visibly disheartened at this news. Damn, that's a shame, Karui muttered, biting her lip. I've really been wanting to find out what happens. They ended the last one on such a cliffhanger. I know, right? Tenten said. Gah, and I'd already pre-ordered it, too. Where from? Tamari asked. I've been looking for a while, but I couldn't find any sites. Oh, it's a bookstore owned by one of my business associates, Tenten said. Just a small one, but they carry some real hidden gems. I'll bring you there sometime. Shikamaru sighed as the discussion once more fractured into a number of vectors, each veering off course from the original topic. Yeah, he thought, this is going to take a while. Chunin Exams Stadium. Timeline Beta. The past. They're quite fearsome, aren't they? Those students of Kakashi's. Kurenai Yuha took another swig from her hip flask, her face ruddy. It's amazing how strong they are, Asuma agreed, lighting another cigarette. Spent butts littered the floor at his feet. Simply terrifying. I'm glad I've never done anything to get on their bad side. Seriously, though. Kurenai continued, slurring her words a bit. It's ridicule, crazy stupid how strong those two are. Not even Hinata's that strong, and I was sure she'd win this whole thing with both hands tied behind her back. Crazy. Asuma took a long drag of his cigarette, so much so that a full quarter of its length wound up glowing orange and crumbling into ash within a few seconds. He coughed loudly and explosively, the cigarette nearly flying right out of his mouth. Kakashi's really outdone himself with these guys, the man said with noticeable jitters. They're absolute monsters. It's absurd how powerful they are. Horribly unfair to the rest of us. Yeah, Kurenai agreed, slouching in her seat. How can we compete with those lil devils? Some ways off, Anko Mitarashi was vocally applauding her date. You're a hell of a teacher, Kakashi. She crowed. Although I had a part in teaching Sasuke, too. But I certainly know that I didn't teach him to make a giant suit of armor out of chakra. Haha. I didn't do all that much, honestly, said Kakashi in response, scratching the back of his. Largely I just focused on teamwork building exercises and stuff like that. Most of their techniques were self-taught or learned from independent mentors. You aren't giving yourself enough credit. Guy laughed. If the students excel so thoroughly, surely the master must have had some hand in it. This modesty is just what I would expect from my eternal rival. Kakashi's sweat dropped. Yeah. I'm really not being modest, he said. Those three were ridiculously powerful well before I got my hands on them. In all honesty, they actually haven't even improved that much in the time since their Genin test, aside from learning a wider array of jutsu, and even that has been more through their own independent study than any teaching on my part. Don't be so shy, killer. Anko teased, waggling her eyebrows. I'm not the one who taught Sasuke all those fancy visual jutsu. Those were self-taught, Kakashi insisted. I didn't even know the Sharingan had such potential until after Sasuke first used Tsukuyomi on me. And most of Naruto's jutsu were either invented by the boy himself, or taught to him by Jiraiya-sama. Honestly, the only one of them I went out of my way to teach jutsu to was Sakura, and even she owes most of her power and control to simple independent training. Ha ha ha. Guy boisterously laughed. They say humility is characteristic of true greatness, Kakashi. I'll have to work hard to keep up with you as a teacher. Until now I've focused on Lee because he was the one most in need of help, and the one most likely to benefit from learning my style, but if my students are to stand a chance against yours I will need to increase the intensity of all their training. Elsewhere in the audience, Neji and Tenten felt cold shivers go down their spines. Kakashi sighed. What part of autodidactic prodigies do you guys not understand? He wondered. The part where you'd deny credit for making those kids so strong, Anko said. Especially to the face of your sexy, easily impressed girlfriend. Why, she might be ready to jump your bones the second she has you alone, if only you'd go along with the praise. Oh. So you're easily impressed now, are you? Said Kakashi dryly. I am as far as you know, Anko cheekily replied, giving him a rakish wink. She then placed a hand on his lap and leaned in close. Guy chortled and politely averted his gaze. It was a rare show of perceptiveness on the hot-blooded Jounin's part. Kakashi gulped and felt his cheeks burn red-hot. Oh, he said lamely, unable to think of anything more eloquent. Anko grinned from ear to ear. Hyuga family estate. Timeline Gamma. The future. Hayashi Hyuga was not the most, emotionally savvy father out there, but he was good enough to know when his older daughter was upset. Some would say he was not the best dad in the world, and that he hadn't done the greatest job of nurturing his children when they were young, and he'd be among the first to say these detractors were probably right, but at the end of the day he still cared for his daughters. He had been willing to fight a blind spaceman and his flying ninja army to protect Hinata and Hanabi, and had readily set aside his own pride and pleaded with the Hokage to stall the destruction of the moon during that whole fiasco 18 years back. Hayashi may not have been a tender or sensitive sort of man, but he still loved his children and tried to do right by them in his own way. So when he saw his eldest Hinata moping aimlessly around the compound with a despondent, dejected expression, naturally the man felt it was his duty to find out what was wrong. He might not have been the most gentle or supportive father, but he cared for his children and genuinely wanted them to be happy. Hello, Hinata. Is there something bothering you? He greeted her with this query and a small nod, walking up beside her. She gave a start at the sound of his voice, and spun around to face him. Right away, Hayashi could tell that she seemed tense. Anxious. She stared at him for a moment, and almost it seemed like she was trying to work out who he was. Then her eyes widened and she grew a shade paler, stiffening up and noticeably straightening her back. Father. Hello. I'm fine. She did not look him in the eye as she said this. Hayashi resisted the urge to frown, bemused by this reaction. He studied Hinata curiously for a moment, noting how she fidgeted and shuffled her feet. That was odd. He hadn't seen such worried and insecure body language from his daughter since the early days of her first pregnancy, when she had initially fretted over the well-being of her unborn child and her own fitness to be a mother. Even then, that had only lasted a few days, after which she shed her fears. By the time of her second pregnancy, she was as calm as an old hand and perfectly confident. And aside from that, Hayashi could not recall seeing Hinata so jumpy or nervous in decades. Not since her youth. It was like she had lost almost all of the confidence she had built up over the years. To his knowledge, there was only one thing that might possibly have caused her to regress this badly, although even that felt like a serious stretch. Hayashi closed his eyes. "Has there been a problem with your husband?" he shrewdly inquired. An astute individual would have taken immediate note of the fact that a man as prim, proper, and fastidiously traditional as Hayashi did not refer to Naruto as Hokage-sama in asking this question. Hinata blushed and fidgeted. Hayashi did not need to see his daughter to know her reaction. He already knew the answer before she even said it. "Yes, father," she admitted, folding immediately. Hayashi was a little taken aback by how quickly she confessed this. Right or wrong, his daughter was normally stubbornly protective of her husband, and almost never spoke ill of him, directly or indirectly, whether he deserved it or not. Was this a sign, then, that his son-in-law had done something too awful for even the patient and forgiving Hinata to gloss over? Or was the matter more complicated than that? Or something else entirely? Hayashi, while not one to put much store by mere hearsay, had heard tell of the Nanadime allegedly falling ill. Although he did not know the veracity of these claims, he supposed that if Naruto became extremely sick then Hinata might very well go beside herself with worry. Wanting to give the younger man a benefit of the doubt, Hayashi decided to inquire further into the specifics of his daughter's anxiety. She was less forthcoming on this part, however, and what little he could coax her to say was fragmented and confused. But with much reassuring and gentle wheedling, he eventually managed to figure out that Naruto had apparently engaged in some manner of flirtatious behavior with his former teammate, Sakura Uchiha. This somewhat bemused Hayashi, as while he chose to remain as ignorant as possible in regards to his daughter's sex life, because that was far too awkward a topic of conversation for an old-fashioned man like him, he nonetheless knew enough to understand that there had been understandings in the past between Hinata and her husband, particularly in regards to the Uchiha clan head and his wife. Uzumaki were a passionate lot, and Uchiha no less so, even if the latter was better at obfuscating it with a veneer of aloof stoicism. And the former in particular had once possessed something of a reputation for their libertarian views on sexuality and marriage. Some called them hedonists, others perverts, but a bold few actually emulated a couple of their bizarre traditions. Much though he would prefer not to know this, Hayashi was peripherally aware of the fact that his daughter and her husband had engaged in certain activities with the Uchiha couple in the past. Thus, he was at first a little puzzled that Hinata, who had in domesticity found her true calling and become almost immutably sure and confident over the years, should seem so distraught over something he would have thought was, well, just a thing they did. But then, the whole concept of such activities seemed unutterably alien to Hayashi in the first place, so he supposed it was not inconceivable that there might be a whole world of unspoken rules and courtesies he knew nothing about which dictated what was and was not appropriate in such arrangements. And it was equally conceivable that his son-in-law, however much he had matured over the years, might have through some lingering vestiges of thoughtless insensitivity crossed some nebulous line and distressed his daughter. It still felt like a bit of a stretch, but that was the best explanation he could come up with. Now, while a part of Hayashi immediately wanted to exact brutal retribution on Naruto, the more rational and restrained portions of his mind knew that assaulting the Hokage, aside from being horribly idiotic and easily construed as high treason, would not fix whatever underlying problems there were that had caused his daughter's apparent nervous breakdown. And Hinata still loved her husband. Hayashi could see that much as plain as daylight, and his daughter would most certainly not appreciate any violent actions on her father's part. So he took a deep breath, gave her a comforting pat on the shoulder, much to her apparent confusion, and resolved to have a talk with Lord Seventh at the nearest possible opportunity. "Dad, please stop hovering over my shoulder. I'm trying to focus." Sasuke Uchiha colored a little and took a step back. He still lingered in Sarada's immediate vicinity, however, and his eyes were trained intently on the young woman's back. "It's getting kinda creepy," Boruto muttered under his breath next to Sarada, tapping a pencil on a piece of notebook paper as he absent-mindedly studied a half-finished sketch of a seal array. "Why is he the only one still here?" They took your mom back to the Hyuga estate, and my mom to stay with Shizune-san. I'm not sure where your dad got to, but I know they're keeping a close watch on him. And your dad? Well, he didn't want to leave, Sarada said lamely. An anemic chakra or not, he still has all his old reflexes. I don't think there's anyone short of the Hokage who could get him to budge. Bold snorted. I'm sure I could make him leave if I wanted to, he said. Or, failing that, the two of us working together. Maybe, Sarada said, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. Since he'd tire himself out quickly, without access to his usual reserves. But that would make a big ruckus, and things would probably get even more complicated. So we'll just have to suffer through the awkwardness for now. There was a moment of silence. How's that jutsu formula look? She asked. Not good, Bold said, knowing that Sarada was intentionally changing the topic. If figuring out how to do the jutsu was hard, working out a way to reverse it will be a nightmare. Sarada hummed thoughtfully. Maybe that's not the right way to go about it, though, she murmured. If we performed the jutsu again, maybe we could. Unlikely, Bold said. Since we haven't ceased to exist, and since we continue to be aware of the fact that time travel has occurred, it is safe to assume that our past is unchanged. And I really doubt that this is because of our parents not changing anything. Besides, if you think about it, if they were sent into past, and we were operating under linear time, then what happened to them? Their present bodies are here, only occupied by past minds. Yet, if our parents' minds were sent into the past of this world, then logically wouldn't their present minds be here, occupying their bodies, only having gone through the past a second time up to this point? Sarada blinked. I didn't understand a single word of that, she said frankly. Time travel is fucking confusing, Boruto commiserated, but essentially, I don't think using the jutsu again would solve our problem. With our luck, it would just switch these past minds with other past minds, making things even more complicated. No, I think it's safe to say that space-time is operating under string theory, multiverse theory, or something analogous to that. Oh, Sarada said, nodding slowly. That makes more sense. So our parents are probably stuck in a tangential timeline that has completely diverged from this one, undoubtedly lost to us among a sea of infinite probability. A beat. From outside Hokage Tower, citizens of Konoha were privy to the apparent explosion of a good chunk of the second floor's east wing. A great smashing sound alerted them to the sudden destruction, before wood and plaster started to rain down on the streets. With an ease of much practice, civilian passerby nimbly ducked for cover as the mostly harmless shrapnel fell. At first, some people wondered if the village was under attack. Some of the jumpier, more experienced old-timers, in particular, started heading for the emergency shelters or running to fetch their weapons out of reflex. But then they heard a shout that anyone who had lived in this village for any length of time would be well familiar with. Shanaruga! And, realizing that it was just Mrs. Uchiha or her daughter, the citizens promptly relaxed and resumed their regular activities. Omika! Grandma's girl! She stood exultant atop a hill of the vanquished, her foes lying senseless beneath her feet. They were heaped up in a great pile, broken and battered by ruthlessly efficient strikes. They were laid low before her strength, cast down from their places of pride by her own two hands. A cackle bubbled up from her lips, and she threw her head back in howling laughter. Cold light gleamed in her eyes, and a hot thrill coursed through her veins. Warrior blood pure and true sang with the joy of battle. Hima! The door to the academy sparring area creaked open. She turned around and saw her brother, Boruto Uzumaki, peer out into the grassy lawn where practical exercises were held. Bolt! She chirped. Jumping down from the bodies of her vanquished foes, Himawari skipped over to her brother. What are you doing here? He sweat dropped and coughed nervously. It's complicated, he said. But Udon-san said you should come with us. I have to leave? But I was having so much fun. Himawari cutely whined. Bolt looked at the unconscious bodies of his sister's classmates and instructors. A few more beads of sweat rolled down the side of his head. All right. He said slowly, anxiously. Maybe I'll leave you here after all, then. One of the almost sensate teachers whimpered, and a few sounds almost like no, please. Take her, drifted from the pile of twitching limbs and bodies. Bolt pretended not to hear as he shut the behind him. Himawari waved goodbye for a few seconds. Then she turned to assess her victims with a cruel smile. Okay. Now, where were we? Himawari's classmates and teachers fearfully shuddered. Omaketu. We coulda had it all. Note, what I regard as the only truly missed opportunity in this FIC. Naruto and Sasuke grinned as they faced off from opposite sides of the arena. Biting their thumbs, they flicked through a sequence of seals, one-handed, on Sasuke's part, then slapped their hands down on the ground. Summoning jutsu. They shouted in unison. They poured their chakra into the jutsu. Twin puffs of smoke erupted, engulfing the whole arena. Let's go, said Naruto. Come, said Sasuke also. The smoke cleared. Naruto and Sasuke met the eyes of their chosen familiars. Aida's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Gamakaki raised a webbed forelimb in casual greeting. Yo, big bro. What's up? The latter cheerfully croaked. How may I serve you, master? The former hissed. Beads of sweat trickled slowly down the sides of Naruto and Sasuke's heads. Air. The two rivals stared at the puny child forms of their respective familiars, dumbstruck expressions on their faces. Sweat dropping and sheepishly paling, they averted their gazes. Aida, barely a foot long and maybe an inch wide, wriggled in the dirt. Gamakaki, coming no higher than Naruto's shin, gave a bright salute. I totally meant to do that, said Naruto and Sasuke in unison. The audience did a mass face fault. That's it for part 11. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.